Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. On this week's episode, we bring you a $100 Syr Gwyn Hero of Ashvale deck out of the Throne of Eldraine Brawl decks. Syr Gwyn is 3, a red, a white, and a black Mardu for a legendary creature with vigilance and menace. Whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Equipment you control have Equip, Knight 0. Syr Gwyn is a very powerful Knight commander. With this deck, we're going to focus on ramping very early in the game so that we can get Syr Gwyn down a turn or 2 early and start generating value off of her draw engine that she has attached to her. Since Syr Gwyn is a Mardu commander, there is a lot of interaction in this deck. We are playing in colors that are very strong at interacting with our opponent's boards. And Syr Gwyn has some obvious synergies with a Knight tribal build, which is the way we are going to build this deck. We put quite a few Knights in this deck as they will be able to take advantage of Syr Gwyn's abilities of equipping our Knights for free, which is really powerful. And then of course in this deck we are going to take advantage of that ability, and we did put quite a bit of equipment into our deck to take advantage of Syr Gwyn's abilities. We put all the really great budget equipment into this build. And the way we're going to win with this deck is we're going to pump our creatures up with our equipment and get in for a lot of damage. We will plan to go wide with our creatures and try to win the game through combat damage. So first up, we're going to talk about all the ramp that we include in this deck. Since we are in Mardu, we're going to focus heavily on artifact ramp, and we included all of the 2 converted mana cost budget rocks that we can include in this deck. So first up, we have the talismans. They all cost 2 generic mana, and you can tap them to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can tap them to add a colored mana to your mana pool of each type, and they'll deal 1 damage to you. These are very cheap mana rocks that come down early and give you some really great ramp early in the game. Next up, we included all of the signets in our colors as well, and those are 2 generic mana for artifacts that you can pay 1 and tap it to add 2 colored mana to your mana pool, and we have 1 for each of the guilds in our deck. And then we also included Soul Ring in this deck. It's 1 colorless mana for an artifact, and you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. And then we also included Felwar Stone. It's 2 colorless for an artifact. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Since we are in a 3-color deck, chances are high that we'll be able to produce at least 1 to 2 colors of our mana. These are all cheap, efficient ways of ramping early in the game, and they all cost under 2 converted mana cost, which is important because we want to get started early. Since we are playing a more aggro strategy, we want to be able to get our creatures down quickly to start getting in hits on our opponents. Next up, let's talk about some of the ways that we're able to accrue card advantage in this deck. And the first card I want to talk about is Sign in Blood. It's black for a sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. And then we have Knight's Whisper. It's 1 in a black, you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. These are both cheap ways of drawing cards in this deck. It does cost you a couple of life, which isn't really a huge deal. And then Open the Armory is 1 in a white for a sorcery. Search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Now this isn't card draw per se, but it does get you some of the best equipment out of your deck. So this is a really nice tutor to include into your deck. Next up, let's talk about all the interaction that we have in this deck. Since we are playing Mardu, we do have a lot of ways that we're able to interact with our opponent's board states. First up, we have Swords to Plowshares. It's 1 white for an instant. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. And then we have Terminate. It's a black and a red for an instant. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. And then Mortify is 1, a white and a black for an instant. Destroy target creature or enchantment. These are all really cheap ways to deal with our opponent's threats on the board. Next up, we have Anguish Unmaking. It's 1, a white and a black for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent. You lose 3 life. And this can target any permanent, which makes this a really powerful card. And then Utter End is 2 white and a black for an instant. Exile target non-land permanent. Again, this is just like Anguish Unmaking, except it costs 1 more mana, but you don't lose the 3 life, which is good. And then Bedevil is black, red for an instant. Destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Then we have Despark. It's a white and a black for an instant. Exile target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. And then Generous Gift is 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. This is just like Beast Within, but in white. Both of these cards give you ways of dealing with permanents, which is very powerful. And then Return to Dust is 2 white for an instant. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast this spell during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 other target artifact or enchantment. More often than not, you will play this card during your main phase to get the additional value out of it. And then we have Boros Charm. It's a red and a white for an instant. you can choose one. Boros Charm deals 4 damage to target player. Permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. The one that I really like, and the reason why I put it in this deck, is to give your permanents indestructible is very powerful against a board wipe. Since we are playing a lot of creatures in this deck, having something like Boros Charm in there to protect them if your opponents go to wipe your board is going to be very important. This is a good way to protect you from having to start over completely. And then we included a couple of modal board wipes in this deck. I personally like playing board wipes that give me some options in dealing with different types of permanents. So the first one I included is Cleansing Nova. It's 3 white for a sorcery. Choose one. Destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Merciless Eviction is 4 a white and a black for a sorcery. Choose one. Exile all artifacts, all creatures, all enchantments, or all planeswalkers. These are really great ways that you can deal with your opponent's permanents, and you can pick and choose. If you have a really good board presence with creatures, but your opponents are starting to ramp out with artifacts or have a lot of enchantments, you can just choose one of those options instead and leave your board presence with all your creatures intact. And then single combat is 3 white for a sorcery. Each player choose a creature or planeswalker they control, then sacrifices the rest. Players can't cast creature or planeswalker spells until the end of your next turn. This is a really great card in this deck. If you're going the more Voltron route and building Syr Gwyn as a Voltron commander, you can put this card in your deck and you don't have to worry about wiping all your other creatures. You can keep your Syr Gwyn on the board and all of your opponent's creatures get destroyed. So let's talk about all the knights that we have in this deck, and we do have quite a few of them. And this is a knight tribal deck, so we did include all the best knights that we could in our budget. So first up, we have Fervent Champion. It's 1 red for a creature that has first strike and haste. Whenever it attacks, another target attacking knight you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Equip abilities you activate that target Fervent Champion costs 3 less to activate. This has a lot of synergy in our deck. It comes down on turn 1. You can equip it for really cheap if you have an equipment to play on the following turn. And it does have first strike, so if you equip this with something that gives it a little boost to its power, it's going to be problematic for your opponents to block. Foulmare Knight is a creature that has adventure on it. You can play the adventure side for 2 and a black, and it's an instant. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. And it can also be played for a creature for 1 mana for a 1/1 with Death Touch. And Death Touch creatures are very annoying for your opponents to block, as they will kill any creature that they deal damage to. And then we have Black Lance Paragon. It's 1 and a black for a creature that has flash. When Black Lance Paragon enters the battlefield, target knight gains Death Touch and lifelink until end of turn. Next up, we have Embereth Shieldbreaker. It's 1 and a red for a creature with adventure. And the adventure side is Battle Display. You can cast that for a red mana. It's a sorcery. Destroy target artifact. And you can play the creature side for 1 and a red, and it's a 2/1 knight. And then Smitten Swordmaster is also an adventure card, and it has Curry Favor for 1 black, and it's a sorcery. You gain X life, and each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of knights you control. This is a very powerful card if you have a lot of knights on the battlefield. And then you can pay it for its creature side, and so 1 and a black for a lifelink knight. That's a 2/1. And then Order of Midnight is also an adventure card, and its adventure side is Alter Fate. It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and then you can pay the creature side for 1 and a black. It's a flying 2/2 knight that can't be blocked. Next up, we have Worthy Knight. It's 1 and a white for a creature. Whenever you cast a night spell, create a 1/1 white human creature token. This is one of our powerful token generators in this deck, and it comes down as early as turn 2, making it a very strong card in this deck. Next up, we have Knight of the White Orchid. It's white for a creature with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. This is a really nice card that can ramp us if one of our opponents gets ahead of us in land count. If we're second or third on the table rotation, this is always going to get us a land onto the battlefield. And then Leonin Shikari is 1 and a white. It's not a knight, it is a cat soldier. You may activate equip abilities anytime you could cast an instant. Now, while this isn't a knight, it's a very, very powerful card in our deck, as we do have a ton of equipment, and this is one that you'll want to get down to be able to swap equipment around to your creatures at instant speed. If you have something like Swiftfoot boots, it makes it extremely difficult to target your creatures, as you can just swap the Swiftfoot boots all around your creatures at instant speed. Then we have Wintermoor Commander. It's 1 and a black for a creature with Death Touch. Wintermoor Commander's toughness is equal to the number of knights you control, and whenever it attacks, another target knight you control gains indestructible until end of turn. This is just a really powerful way of protecting some of the knights that you may have in the deck. And then Corpse Knight is also 1 and a black, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. This is a really nice card for chipping in some damage over the course of the game, especially if you have a token generator on the battlefield. It's just going to hit your opponents for 1, which is going to close that life total down and make it easier to kill your opponents through combat damage. Stormfist Crusader is a black and a red for a creature with menace. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card and loses 1 life. Now, this is a symmetrical effect, and it is going to work for all the players at the table. It is just a really nice card to get down very early, and you do need card advantage in this deck. There isn't a ton of it, so having a little bit of card advantage on this card, even though it does help your opponents out, is really good. Next up, we have one of the lords in this deck, and it's Inspiring Veteran. It's a red and a white for a creature. Other knights you control get +1/+1. And then Silverblade Paladin is 1 white for a creature with Soul Bond. And Soul Bond lets you pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters the battlefield, and they remain paired for as long as you control both of them. As long as Silverblade Paladin is paired with another creature, both creatures have double strike. And then Mirran Crusader is 1 white for a creature that has double strike, protection from black and from green, and it's a 2/2. Then we have another legendary creature in this deck, and it's Danitha Capation Paragon. And it's 2 and a white for a creature that has First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink, and a very important ability, and its aura and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So this is going to reduce all the costs of all of our equipment that we have in this deck, which we do have a ton of. She's a very powerful card. And then Acclaimed Contender is 2 and a white for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, if you control another knight, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a knight or equipment or legendary artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This is almost always going to pull a card off the top of your library, as it does hit all the types of the cards that we include in this deck. Midnight Reaper is 2 and a black for a creature. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, it's going to deal 1 damage to you, and you'll also draw a card. This is a really good draw engine, and we don't have a lot of ways of drawing cards. And then we have Valiant Knight, which is another lord in our deck, and it's 3 and a white for a creature. Other knights you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 3 white. Knights you control get double strike until end of turn. This is a great way of closing out the game, and giving all of your knights double strike on a turn can be very punishing for your opponents. Next up, we have Ariel, Knight of Windgrace. She's another legendary knight. She costs 2, a white and a black, and has Vigilance. You can pay 2 and a white and tap it to create a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance. Or you can pay black and tap it, tap X untapped knights you control, destroy target creature with power X or less. This is another great token generator, and also has some removal on it if you need to tap your knights down to get rid of a problematic creature that your opponents may control. Knights of the Black Rose is 3 white and a black for a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. And whenever an opponent becomes the monarch, if you were the monarch as the turn began, that player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. If you do get the monarch in this game, it will be difficult for your opponents to get it back, and it will give you a way of drawing an extra card each turn if you do have it. And then the last 2 knights that we have in this deck is Adriana, Captain of the Guard. It's 3, a red and a white for a creature with melee. And melee is whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attacked with a creature this combat. So this can at max get you +3/+3. And other creatures you control have melee. If a creature has multiple instances of melee, each triggers separately. That's a really strong ability to have on this creature. All of your creatures will get melee, and you can get in for a ton of damage. And then Sir Conrad the Grim is a newer one out of Throne of Eldraine. It's 3 black for a legendary creature. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then you could pay 1 and a black. Each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. This is a great way of chipping in for some extra damage over the course of the game, as we will have creatures that will die and go to the graveyard, and we will also have ways of bringing them back as well. There are 2 Knight tribal cards that we included in this deck that have a lot of synergy with our theme, and the first one is Knight's Charge. It's 1, a white and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a knight you control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And you can pay 6, white and a black, and sacrifice it. Return all knight creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is an extremely powerful card, and this does come in the Brawl Precon deck, which means if you bought the Syr Gwyn deck, you will already have one, so you won't need to purchase this, and it is worth including in any Knight's Tribal deck. And then we have the Circle of Loyalty. It's 4 white for a legendary artifact. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each knight you control. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you cast a legendary spell, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. And then you can pay 3 in a white and tap it. Create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. This is a very, very powerful card in our deck. With the right hand, we can get this card down on turn 3 or 4 and really go to town with this card. And when you play your Syr Gwyn the turn after this, you're going to get a 2/2 white knight, and you're just going to start getting in for a lot of damage, which is a really powerful card in this deck. One of the most powerful cards in this deck, and one of the most powerful white cards in Commander, is Sun Titan. It's 4 white for a creature with vigilance. Whenever Sun Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This can get you anything from a fetch land, a 3 mana cost creature. It can get your equipment back and put it right back onto the battlefield, which is very, very powerful. This will accrue you a lot of value if this sticks around, and we do have a lot of synergy with this in getting back our equipment, our creatures that may die over the course of the game. Next, let's talk about all the equipment that we included into this deck. And first up, we have Steelclaw Lands. It's a black and a red for an artifact that gives equip creature +2/+2. It has equip knight 1 or equip for 3. So more often than not, you're going to be able to equip this for 1, or if you have your Syr Gwyn out, you can equip for 0 as long as it's to a knight. Sword of Vengeance is 3 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and you can equip it for 3. And then Loxodon Warhammer is 3 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +3/+0 and has Trample and Lifelink. Adding Trample and Lifelink to your creatures is really powerful in this deck. We do have a little bit of life gain synergy on some of the knights in this deck. This gives you a really cheap, efficient way of gaining some extra life and getting some damage through with Trample as well. Then we have Swiftfoot Boots. It's 2 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature has Hexproof and Haste, and you can equip it for 1. This is a really important equipment in this deck, as we can equip this to our Syr Gwyn to give it Hexproof, and your opponents will not be able to target your creature that you have this attached to. Sword of the Animist is 2 colorless for a legendary artifact. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever it attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library, and the equip cost on this is 2. This is just a really nice way to ramp in this deck, especially since we are playing colors that aren't generally great at ramping. And then we have Blackblade Reforged, 2 colorless for a legendary artifact, and equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control, and you can equip it to a legendary creature for 3 or equip 7. So the equip 7 is very expensive, but with your Syr Gwyn on the battlefield, this will equip for 0, or you can equip it to any legendary for 3, which is a little bit better. Next up, we have the Sigiled Sword of Valerin. It's 3 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+0, has Vigilance, and is a knight in addition to its other types. Whenever equipped creature attacks, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance that's attacking, and you can equip this for 3. There aren't very many non-knight creatures in this deck. There's a couple, but being able to equip that to those creatures and give them the creature type of knight is very good in this deck. You can put this on your Sun Titan, and your Sun Titan will become a knight, and you'll get all the synergies that you have in this tribal deck of being a knight, which is really great. And then Stoneforge Masterwork is one of the more powerful equipment in this deck, and it's 1 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it, and you can equip it for 2. You can put this on your creature, and your creature's going to get +1/+1 for all the knights that you have on the battlefield. Mace of the Valiant is 2 and a white for an artifact, and this comes in the Brawl deck, and it is equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each charge counter on Mace of the Valiant, and has Vigilance. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a charge counter on Mace of the Valiant, and it has a equip cost of 3. This card's going to get a lot of charge counters quickly since we have so many creatures in this deck, and every time you create a token with Mace of the Valiant on the battlefield, it's also going to get a charge counter, making it very powerful. Next up, we have Colossus Hammer. It's 1 colorless for an artifact, and equipped creature gets +10/+10 and loses flying, and you can equip it for 8. This is a very powerful equipment at a very cheap rate, and this will attach for 0 with Syr Gwyn on the battlefield. And then Grafted Exoskeleton is 4 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Infect. Whenever Grafted Exoskeleton becomes unattached from a permanent, sacrifice that permanent, and it has Equip 2. Grafted Exoskeleton on any of your creatures is going to close out the game very quickly as their life total immediately becomes 10. If you put this onto Syr Gwyn's going to become a 7/7, 2 hits, and the game's over for that player. Argentum Armor is 6 colorless for an artifact. Equipped creature gets +6/+6, and whenever equipped creature attacks, destroy target permanent, and it has an equip cost of 6. And then last but not least, we do have Masterwork of Ingenuity. It's 1 colorless for an artifact equipment, and you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. This not only will copy your equipment that you have, but if your opponents have a powerful equipment on the battlefield that's out of our budget, let's say for example one of the swords, you can put this onto the battlefield and it becomes a copy of that equipment, making it a very strong card to include in this deck. Last but not least, let's go over the mana base that we chose for this deck. Now we want to focus on as many untapped lands as possible in this deck. Since we are playing a 3-color deck, we can't avoid putting any tap lands in this deck, but we're going to try to keep it to a minimum if we can. So first up, we have Command Tower. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. And then Exotic Orchard is a land that lets you tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. More often than not, you're going to be able to tap this for all 3 of your colors, but you'll be able to tap this for at least 1 or 2 almost every game. And then Tournament Grounds is a land that you can tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, and then you can tap it to add a red, a white, or a black to your mana pool to spend only on knights or equipment spells. And good news, we are playing a Knights Tribal deck with a lot of equipment, so this is going to tap for 3 colored mana almost all the time. And then we have Unclaimed Territory. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool, and then you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. Now with this, when you play it, you're going to choose Knights, and it's going to tap for all 3 colors, and it's just a really powerful, cheap land to put in your deck for any tribal strategy. And then Nomad Outpost is one of those tap lands that we have in our deck. It's going to enter the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add Mardu to your mana pool. Next up, we have 2 lands that enter the battlefield tapped, but they do give you a scry 1 when they enter the battlefield, which is a little bit of an upside for coming in tapped. And they are Temple of Silence and Temple of Triumph. Then we have a couple of pain lands in this deck, the 2 inexpensive ones that we can afford in our budget, and it's Caves of Koilos and Battlefield Forge. They both tap to add a colorless to our mana pool, or you can tap it to add a colored mana to your mana pool and it deals 1 damage to you. The other one that you would be looking to add into this deck is Sulphurous Springs, and it is a little bit more expensive, so we couldn't include it into our budget, but if you have one lying around, it's definitely worth including. And then we have 3 more tap lands in this deck, and these are the last tap lands that we included. Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. Both of them you can tap and sacrifice to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. This is just a really nice way to fix your mana and get the right mana that you need at the right time. And then Myriad Landscape also enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add a colorless to your mana pool. Pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it, and search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. And then we have a couple of utility lands, and the first one is Vault of the Archangel. It's a land that you can tap to add 1 to your mana pool, or you can pay 2, a white and a black, to tap it, and creatures you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. This is a really powerful land as it will help you get through some damage. If your opponents have a gummed up board with creatures, having the Death Touch be added to your creatures makes it unincentivized for them to block. And then Rogue's Passage is a land that you can tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 4 and tap it. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. This is a really powerful land in Voltron strategies. You can tap this to give your Syr Gwyn unblockable and then get in for a huge amount of damage with it. And then Buried Ruin is a really great land in this deck. You can tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 2, tap it and sacrifice it. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. This gives you some protection to get back some of your powerful equipment in this deck and is just a really nice card to include. And then last but not least, we have all of the basic lands in this deck. We included 6 swamps, 9 plains, and 5 mountains. There are more white creatures in this deck, especially lower on the curve, so we do want to have more plains at our disposal. Thank you so much for watching this Budget Deck Tech today. If you have any suggestions for some of the picks in this deck, or agree with or disagree with some of the choices, let us know in the comments down below. If you like this video, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already, and check us out on Patreon over at patreon.com patreon.com/budgetedh. There's a lot of different tiers for rewards over on Patreon. See you guys next time.